After a summer away from your feed, today is a new start to the Picturebooking podcast. We are experimenting with the show this fall, and I like the change. This will not shock anybody, but I love story structure. I like that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Of course, endings are my favorite. What an ending gives you is space. Space to think, to breathe, and to grow into what you experience during the story. Now, Picturebooking's been around for 9+ years. And up until this summer, there was no ending. And I don't think that was the healthiest thing for this show. I think I personally needed the space to think and breathe and grow into what I experienced producing the show. So welcome back to the Picturebooking podcast. We have a great season of conversations to share with you this fall. And then we'll have a proper ending to what will be an exceptionally fun lineup of authors, illustrators, and picture books. Here's a sneak peek at what the next 10 weeks have in store for you. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Bob Shea, and I'm an author-illustrator, and I wrote the runaway smash hit beloved book, Shea Bob. Yeah, so who wet my pants? In that book, there's a bear who wets his pants. I don't want not to spoiler, it was him. And he blames his, accuses his friends the whole book, relentlessly. And they're cool about it. And they're like, hey, man, it happens to everybody. I used to wet my pants all the time. And he's like, oh, really? Wet pants are old hat, are they? And he, and it's another one it's just absurd. And so Zach and I are friends, and I wanted to work with Zach O'Hara for a really long time. He's like, we got to find a book to do together. And I had this book I had this sketch for a long time. I had it written out. I had the idea, and I was going to draw it. But you know what the problem is? It's called Who Wet My Pants, and my style is a little cartoony. And people would dismiss it and be like, oh, it's a potty training book. You know what I mean? And so his very grounded, more solid characters in a more defined, solid world sort of gave the story the gravitas that it deserved. So, like I said, my background is art direction, creative direction, design. I know when I'm not right for a project. You know what I mean? I know I'm not I could draw anything. No, I know what things work and what don't. And Zach just, oh my, I love that book so much. I'll tell you, when somebody else does your stuff for you, not for you, when they collaborate with you, I don't want to sound like you did it for me. You get this thing, and it's a gift. It's because you have this impression of your head of here's how it should look, and then this other amazingly creative person takes what you did and it filters it through their brain, and you're just like, that was great. I love that book so much. I read it to kids all the time. And because of Zach's and I point that out to kids when I do school visits. I'm like, see this stuff? I didn't write that. Zach thought of that stuff. He did that. That's him. So it's when you work with a friend and do a book, you both have to make something, put something into it.
My name is Leah Hayes, and I'm an illustrator, also a graphic novelist. Because it's about light, we felt like we needed to address dark, because if it was just about the sun and the sun is inside you and touching the sun, I feel like that would have been fine. But I think it's really cool to have the counter. There's also the time where the sun goes away and there's darkness, and nighttime can be scary. And what does that mean? Or just at least to bring it into the story for a minute. I mean, I have been teaching a course for many years about like I said, visual narratives in a specific course about how to get published, which is a really funny thing to teach because you can't really teach it. But it's in the course, I have a lot of students who tend to want to write graphic novels, which has always been my specialty. So I was able to totally talk about that, totally help them all the time. But I would always have these students that would be like, hey, I actually want to write a children's book. So can you walk me through the process? And I was always like, sure, I can. And I would talk about like what I kind of thought or knew about children, but I'd not ever written a children's book before. So the fun thing was then this whole last year, as I was teaching the course, I was like, this is what you do, and this is how you edit. Like, I was like, I know now. So bring on those questions about children's books. And I'm not like an expert because I've only made one children's book, but I was just so excited to finally be like, yes, I can help you. This is what you do.
Hi, my name is Vashti Harrison, and I'm an author and illustrator of children's books like Little Leaders, Bold Women, and Black History. I've also illustrated books like Hair Love and Sulway. A lot of my work is for and about Black children, and one thing I've really tried to incorporate into all of my illustration are sweet and innocent characters that we can fall in love with and want to go on adventures with and root for. And that's definitely what I've tried to incorporate into my new book, Big, my first piece of fiction, my first picture book. Big tells the story of a little girl who's experiencing some really big feelings about her body and follows her on a journey towards self-love where she can reclaim her own narrative. It explores some very real challenges that many young Black girls are facing, including adultification and anti-fat bias. This idea of adultification bias, it came from reading this study that came from the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality. And in that study, it said that, you know, at the beginning of the study, it says that Black girls as young as the age of 5 are viewed as less innocent and more adult than their white counterparts. And that's not just from Black or white adults, it's like all across the board. So it's like it's a bias that's inherent in our society. And so it results in them receiving less nurturing and less care, people believing that they are more mature than they are. It ends up with them facing harsher punishment. And I read that study when it came out, and it was right around the time that my first book, Little Leaders, was coming out. And I really, while I was working on it, and I really wanted to infuse this idea of like really sweet children characters. I wanted to create Black kid characters that looked so charming. They popped off the page, and when you saw them, you just said like, I want to hug them. I wanted to create a character like I had just been to London, and there was an exhibition of Winnie the Pooh at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I was like, actually didn't even get to see it. It was like opening right after I left, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to see it. I love Winnie the Pooh. People love Winnie the Pooh. And I wanted to create a character that evoked that from people, that feeling of, oh my gosh, I love him. I want to hug him. And I wondered, like, could I do that with little Black kid characters? After I'd read this study, it broke my heart that these biases exist in our culture, and I just wanted to make things that reminded people that all kids are kids and are deserving of that love and that nurturing. And so that's something that's been part of my work. I definitely, with Little Leaders, those books, I really could have drawn each of those famous people I was writing about to look like themselves, but I wanted to create a kid character. It sort of looks like they're dressing up as these famous people and make them in this really sweet way. And I tried to incorporate that I guess goal into all of my other illustration work, like Sulway and Hair Love and Hello Star. But that question of nurturing and innocence was really kind of at the front of my mind for the longest time. And I knew that I wanted to focus on that in my first piece of fiction. I always knew that I wanted to get to a place where I was writing my own work. And I definitely couldn't have guessed that I would have started my career as a person who was writing historical biographies. Um, but I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about writing through that process. And so this, to me, it is like a natural progression in that path of creating works that remind people of the innocence of children. And, like another metric of this adultification bias is, body. Is that child tall, or are they bigger than the other kids? And what does that result in their treatment? So, uh, I had that goal in my mind. And I also, had a lot of these feelings that sort of were left unresolved from my childhood. So, Big is inspired by so many things, but, it's definitely inspired partially by my own childhood, my own relationship to my body, and that sort of internal journey that, I think I'm still on this really tough journey towards self-love. Growing up in the 90s, it was really hard to sort of navigate the world when everything is dominated by like fashion models and diet culture, and it's really hard to make it through a time like that, or any time like that, honestly, in America. um Even, especially now too. So all of these things were sort of unresolved, but they all came together, and I worried that, like, I wasn't sure that a children's book was the right place to explore these things, because I'm an adult and I'm still struggling with these things. I'm an adult and I still haven't figured out, how to love my body. Um, but so I wondered, like, is this a too adult journey to share in this children's book? But I really wanted to focus on a story that showed a child who starts in this place of self-love, because all children start in this place. No child is born, insecure or hating their body. And when we talk about kids, we say things like, "Oh my gosh, you're such a big girl. You're a big girl now." And that's a good thing. And somewhere along the way that changes. Big becomes bad. Big is a problem and undesirable. Um, and I wanted to show this kid reclaiming that, and showing us that, like, big and kind and graceful can all be a part of the person you become.
My name is Lane Smith, and I've been a children's book illustrator and sometimes writer for about 35 years, I think, since 1987. So, however, whoever wants to do the math can do that. And before that, I worked in magazines and other areas, but I found my calling with kids' books. I grew up collecting old time radio shows. And when I was younger, in the 70s, all my friends were into Led Zeppelin and, the Sex Pistols. And I was collecting cassettes and records of The Shadow and Fibber McGee and Molly, all these old time radio shows, and they called radio the theater of the mind. And I think that's what I loved about it. I would fall asleep every night listening to some show that took you to another world. And we don't really have that too much now. But everything's always evolving, and kids' books is no exception. I just love them, so I just want to be able to keep doing them. I have some of my peers, old guys, just kind of complain and say, "Yeah, the whole business is changing." I'm like, that's good, but I just want to keep doing them, until I die, the day I die. One of my favorite author illustrators is William Steig, and he didn't even start until he was 61, and he was putting out books until the day he died, and that's something to aspire to.